let's move into, how's everybody doing? Good? All right, cool. Love the energy, love the vibe. Our next panel. So we've got circular economy, new manufacturing models, and the impact on design. We were joined by Olga, Stella, earlier this morning, and she will be moderating this panel. Welcome, Olga, Stella, VP Strategy, Communications. Yeah, she's a busy lady, and we're thrilled to have her here with us again today. She's at the College of Creative Studies. And joining her virtually, we have Ruben Dubelaar. He's the advisor international strategy for Holland Circular Hotspot. So welcome to Ruben. We have Bo Shepherd, and she's a co-owner and designer of Woodward Throwbacks. Hi, Bo. We have Joshua Brugeman, an expert in residence at Centrepolis Accelerator at Lawrence Tech, which is, you guys will hear all about. It's very exciting what they're doing there. And we have Benjamin Leffel, and he is Ph.D. postdoctoral fellow at Urban Institute for Global Sustainable Enterprise at University of Michigan. So welcome, Olga.
Great, thanks so much.
To you. Absolutely.
So welcome to this conversation about the circular economy. And what I want to do first was just maybe actually throw to our friend Ruben on the screen to open up with just maybe helping us set the stage for what do we mean by the circular economy.
Hi, good to see you all. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity to be on this panel. Great that we can also do this in a kind of a hybrid method, so it's quite easier to be with you than to fly over there. So good to see you all there. I hope you have a good time. So maybe if we talk about circular economy, and we pre-discussed, of course, Olga, I think for the Dutch it's a kind of a way to meet our sustainability goals. The Dutch government has adopted circular economy as a way to reach those goals. We have about 5 focus sectors in the Netherlands. And the built environment, which is one of the topics of today, of course, is one of them. And also because, the built environment in the Netherlands is using about 40% of the energy and 40% of the primary resources that we need. So the construction sector is one of the largest consumers of heavy and raw materials. And it consumes about 63% of all the materials in the world. So if we want to bring back the amount of CO2 that we produce, we need to bring back the amount of materials that we use. So especially if we only use them one time. It's all about how can we design and produce in such a way that the materials are kept in the loop for a longer period of time. And on the Dutch side, the Dutch government tries to lead the way with circular procurement rules. The public work authorities responsible for the construction of the roads and main, governmental buildings is one of the biggest clients of the construction industry. So if they change the standards, of course, that helps the industry to advance as well. And on the other hand, we these days, of course, we see fluctuating availability of materials, scarcity of certain materials. So it also makes sense to use the city in the urban environment as an urban mine, and change the buildings into a kind of temporary material depot. And of course, this demands a big change in everything we do, the way we design, the way we produce materials. It's about different business models, etc. So I'm sure we're going to talk all about that today. So thanks again for having me. Great to be on the panel, and looking forward also to learn from our other panelists about what's happening in and around Detroit. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruben. Thanks for helping us set the stage a little bit about, broadly kind of what we're talking about today. And as I kind of look to the rest of the panel, I think there's a number of different kind kind of scales that we can think about this. We can think about it from a policy framework. We can think about it from maybe an economic framework and economic forces, consumers, just technology, right? There's a lot of different ways to start to come at this. So maybe Ben, if you might help us think a little bit about like on the city scale and the ways that cities are starting to think about implementing circular economy, decarbonization kinds of policies. What are the themes that you're seeing? What are the issues that you're seeing in the work that you're doing with cities?
Am I audible?
I think you should be.
Okay, yeah. Okay, well, right. There we go. I'll move the mic up a little bit. Hopefully it's not too. Right, I think there is some circularity. Oh, thank you for having me, first of all. I think there's some circularity in trying to kill two birds with one stone, which cities around the world are trying to do. That is achieve decarbonization goals and emissions reduction goals and economic development goals. It's something that I wrote about in a recent piece called Climate Consultants and Complementarity. It's in the Energy Research and Social Science journal. So you're a business or a city and you've adopted climate action and you're committing to decarbonize. Okay, now what? You knowledge seek, you look to find the right resources. And what many cities are doing is they're using procurement power. They are contracting specifically to local environmental management consultancies. And that's that is encouraging the local growth of these, the environmental services sector, the services sector that hires and consultancies that hires many people. I think that the Urban Institute graduates, but many other civil engineers and business and sustainable business experts. And it's kind of a circularity insofar as, well, cities from Knoxville to Melbourne to Singapore will enter into energy performance contracts with these local firms, and they provide the services, and this helps reduce the emissions of buildings. And this, at the same time, over time, this helps grow the local environmental services sector. And there's some certain examples how energy performance contracting works that I can get into if we get around to that. I'm happy to talk about it, but it is kind of a way of trying to make sustainability profitable and reaching that kind of dual goal of sustainability and economic development. But that's the overall view. There are existing models that are working exceedingly well, and I'm happy to talk in greater detail alongside our other great panelists today about that.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And Josh, at Centrepolis, as an expert in residence, you're doing a lot of advising to companies that are starting to see these forces from cities, from other players. And so, when you think about what the companies that you're working with, how are they responding, and how are they? Are these startups? Are these companies that are adjusting their business models? Like, what's happening in that small business space?
Thanks. So I'm with Centrepolis. Centrepolis is an accelerator at Lawrence Tech, and we're very focused on circular economy, clean tech, and climate tech. And so one of the programs that we're involved with is called Next Cycle Michigan. It's a state of Michigan funded program focused on growing the circular economy here in the state. And so when I think about the circular economy, we have a limited amount of resources on this planet. And we know that we're using them more than we have access to right now. And so we got to figure out how to use less of them, how to make products with recycled content, alternative materials. And then when we're done using that product at the end of its life, how do we reuse it and put it into a second and third and fourth use? And so that's essentially the circular economy. What we're seeing at Centrepolis and across the state and globally, quite frankly, right now, it's fascinating. It gets me excited every day. I'm seeing activity all the way from startups here in the state of Michigan that are developing completely new business models, services involved in the circular economy. It could be something as simple as a composting pickup service here in the city of Detroit to fill a much needed gap, to something as more sophisticated, like a paint spraying booth in the automotive industry. All that overspray when you paint a car was going to landfill. There's a company out in Grand Rapids now that is turning that overspray into more paint. And so it seems like a really simple thing, but millions of pounds going to the landfill every year. So we're seeing innovation across the spectrum right now. And I want to pick up on one thing that Ben said about, the economic opportunity. And I can say that companies are starting to really see that sometimes shifting to a circular model is better for business. It's better for the bottom line. They are saving money on sending stuff to the landfill. They are saving money on their raw material inputs. And I moderated a session last week at a conference with some impact investors, one of them Closed Loop Partners, and they commented that they're actually seeing regular institutional investors coming in now and wanting to invest in the circular economy, because as we potentially move into a recession, they see that as a more stable investment now than some of the other stuff, which I found fascinating. So they see sustainability and the circular economy as a safer bet for their money right now.
That is really fascinating. Bo, you've started one of these companies as one of the founders of Woodward Throwbacks. And maybe for the audience, help us understand a little bit about what your business is and, how does it, what motivated you to with your partner to found this company and what are some of the challenges and opportunities that you're seeing?
So hi, I'm Bo Shepard. I'm one of the co-founders of Woodward Throwbacks. We are a sustainable design studio. We design furniture and spaces primarily using reclaimed materials and found objects in the city of Detroit. What drives us, it kind of came as like a necessity. When we started this probably, 7-8 years ago, we noticed a lot of illegal dumping, in our neighborhood in the city of Detroit. And so as a way to furnish our own homes, we would take that material and build a coffee table, build a shelf. And then we saw an opportunity of one, we're, helping cleaning our neighborhood, but two, we're making a product that is unique and has a story and has the texture. And so that really, developed the concept of, we really have to go forward with this. And I think one thing that you guys can all tell is that Detroit is literally being built up. And I think what inspires is that for the city of Detroit being such a culturally rich city, the buildings were built with no expenses spared. I mean, we were saying that Detroit was built almost with a blank check. So you have to think about the materials that are in this building. And so we've been fortunate to be a part of the community by talking to local community members, as well as construction groups saying, hey, if you're renovating this building, let me walk through and see what material is here so we can build with it. And I think that's really exciting because we're preserving the legacy of the city, but we're also showing, like I said, community members that, hey, we save this materials and that their memories will live on as the city is being revitalized. It's like we're not forgetting about what was here and why they chose to, build that structure.
It's a really important, piece of this, right? Is that kind of cultural value and incorporating that into whatever the future has to offer. And I think that might be a nice, theme for us to touch on is a little bit about how our mindsets might need to change, as we move away from, a single use economy and this idea of unlimited resources, unlimited, energy, unlimited, raw materials to one where we're being really intentional the whole life cycle of a product or place, a building. How does our mindset need to change? So maybe Ruben, if you can help us think a little bit about, how have you seen, kind of the Dutch mindset, maybe international mindset around circular economy, adapt and change over the last few years? Where do you think it's going? And then we'll kind of pick up on it here.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I think, we're amongst believers a bit, and also in Holland, you see, of course, that it takes time, you know, to change the mindset. You see it in day-to-day life, you know, if you talk about consumer goods, etc., people start to, you know, adopt it. But you know, if you talk about simple, you know, consumer goods, you know, life cycles might change a bit easier. But if you talk about, you know, the urban development, of course, you need a, yeah, if you want to change it in the upcoming 10, 20, 30 years, you know, it takes a whole systematic change also of the supply chain. And I think, you know, that's why we, you know, need to work together on conferences like this to discuss how we organize it in a different way. And I think it all starts also with some great examples, showing the best practices that are out there. And yeah, both in the US as in the Netherlands, of course, we need the, let's say, to shift the overall mindset, and that takes time. And indeed, it needs to. We need to show also that it, you know, it has an economic value. And indeed, the, you know, current days on shortages of materials, of course, people also start to see the, you know, the added value of circular economy. That it's, you know, that it's cheaper to subtract materials from the urban mine, from the city, you know, from and then it will take to you know, dig it up somewhere in Asia or in Africa, and I think so. The overall mindset, it takes time, but you see that we're slowly moving towards that, and I think that's a very good thing. But it's also for everyone a bit systematic change. You know, supply chains that are, you know, changing completely, because if you want to, you know, make sure that you get your product back, for example, if you talk about servitization, you know, you remain the owner of the product. And, you know, I produce something here in The Hague or in Amsterdam, and I supply it to you guys. How do I get back the materials, etc.? So, you know, it's an overall systematic change that we need, and of course that takes time. Yeah.
Yeah. And Bo, I mean, have you seen just the way consumers approach your products? Has that changed? I mean, the company's been around, I think maybe 10 years now, right? Or 8 years?
14.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 8 years. I guessed well. All right. Or remembered well. So, I mean, has the mindset of consumers changed in that period of time?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I would say, like I said, it goes back to the storytelling of the material and where it came from. I think we were talking about this earlier. We have a new collection that we're making, which is going to be desks and end tables, and it's all using salvage slate chalkboard from schools. I mean, if you think about it, Detroit, unfortunately, has torn down so many schools. And I grew up on the East Coast, and the high school that I went to was not even comparable to the architecture that some of the Detroit buildings have. And so being able to save materials like doors, trim, the slate chalkboard, which, by the way, is extremely heavy. We have like 4 foot by 4 foot slabs of it. You know, and to be able to make product out of it, people will be like, what? This is made from a chalkboard from a school? And they get this like nostalgia and kind of like almost like a good memory of, you know, back when they were, you know, X, Y, and Z, middle school, high school. And so I think that's kind of the reaction that we get, where they're kind of, it's like a shock and awe in the sense of, it's really awesome that you did this, because I would never think that I can use that material. In another example, we actually just did a renovation in my own house where I had like the standard white subway tile that I took it off, and I actually cut the slate chalkboard green side up, because on one side it's like the dark kind of textured slate. It looks similar to the slate, you know, flooring or tiles that you get at Home Depot, but it came from schools. But I put the green side up, and I used that as the backsplash of my kitchen. And it's awesome. It's fun. It's bright. And I think that's something where I would love to be able to save more on that material on a larger scale, you know, and work with a manufacturer. Like, there's so many products that you can make with this material. I think it's just having the idea and like the sheer will to work with the materials.
I think it's a good segue maybe to some of the work Centrepolis is doing with small businesses and just, the technology and how are we thinking differently about technology and incorporating it into some of these opportunities?
So I think I'm going to use Bo's example here as an illustrative point. One of the things that we work with companies on, and I think that anyone playing in the circular economy space is struggling through, is how do I work the upstream and the downstream partners, right? So you've got your upstream source of material figured out. How do I get the salvaged materials from buildings? But then she has to figure out who all of her customers are. And it's a different environment than maybe the normal go-to-market retail model. So innovators like Bo, whether it's the paint spray company that I mentioned, or there's a scrap tire company we're working with in Detroit that can grind them up and make playground surfaces, bike paths, stuff like that. They have to try to penetrate that market that is pretty well established by, let's say, the Asphalt Paving Association. That's an old boys club that you have to break into. So any of those companies are having to figure out how to get the materials and where to sell them to. And that extends all the way up to, let's say, global national retailers like Target. They're figuring out the same thing. So if there's anything there's a lot that gives me hope right now, but I'm seeing innovation. I'm also seeing the circular economy penetrate some of these large retailers like Target. I know that they have sent their entire design teams to training at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to figure out how to redesign the stuff that they're working on. And so, I don't know, all this boils down to we have to really challenge ourselves to think about stepping out of the status quo and incremental change and going for really bold, transformative steps. We have a decade to figure this out and to implement. A couple of years ago, we were maybe dancing around using the term climate change. And I think now it's pretty clear it's here. We are in it. It is happening. And we know the next decade is critical. And so big companies there's a term that we hear a lot, climate risk is business risk. And so as tough as that is to hear, it's good that has penetrated the business community in Wall Street, because they are now starting to make decisions based on that.
Well, and so then cities have a place to play in that, right? I mean, if climate risk is business risk, cities are the places where these businesses are. And, how are city decision makers, have you seen their mindset change, and what might be driving some of their concerns? Is it about residents? Is it about businesses? Is it about, something else?
Yeah. Thank you. Right. In both cities and businesses are co-located, and it's interesting because there's this explosion of companies that are recognizing exactly what you said, that climate risk is business risk. So some companies, thousands of companies all around the world every year are disclosing their climate information to CDP and other sources. And they're implementing all of these decarbonization measures, and at the same time, cities are doing the same thing. They're implementing climate action plans, and there is a convergence. I think we should begin to kind of recognize that there is increasing kind of convergence of the corporate sustainability world, the urban sustainability world. This is some of a big part of the work I'm doing at the Urban Institute for Global Sustainable Enterprise and the Urban Sustainability Research Group at University of Michigan, is that cities and businesses are working together. When City Hall has adopted a climate action plan, and then they look down the street and recognize that, okay, well, T. Rowe Price or whoever it is also is doing the same thing, they then can join forces on, let's say, a zero waste initiative, or on, let's say, they are decarbonizing buildings. City Hall wants to improve the energy efficiency of their buildings. Well, this company that has many facilities in the same city is doing their own thing, ESG, right? What cities call climate action, companies call ESG. They're the same thing.
Yep.
And once they realize that, they can work together. And in London, Paris, Boston, Long Beach, cities and companies are working together to kind of co-finance and to make it cheaper for one another. Well, the city within this boundary and all the businesses within it and all the buildings within it, we want to decarbonize this area anyway. You're part of that. You, the businesses, are already climate active. So let's work together. Let's co-finance. And there's all kinds of emerging models in which there's co-funding and working together to, let's say, align the company's decarbonization or sustainability or circular economy goals with that of the city. They kind of activate one another when they realize that they are neighbors.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting segue maybe to this idea of for this whole thing to work. It's about collaboration. It's about new partnerships. I know Ruben had mentioned at the start of the conversation just this idea of like completely rethinking the supply chain. And so maybe that's something that we can dig into a little bit, is like, how does that supply chain change and shift? And Ruben, if you want to kick us off a little bit on what you've seen in terms of the supply chains of the companies that are working with Holland Circular Hotspot, maybe as a starting point, and then we can dig into some of the U.S. Context.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think tapping into the earlier remarks, it's a systematic change, but it's also taking a city or taking the whole as a neighborhood to start with, and then it's all about looking at the local context, and I want to mention one company. They're very active in the US because the owner is an American lady, Ava Gladdick, and they have a company called Metabolic. And what they do for cities, they make a material flow analysis. So they take the city as a whole, and then they measure, what comes in and what goes out of the city. And where can we kind of bend the waste streams? Where do we see waste streams that we can, put back in the supply chain at a different stage? So I think that's the whole thing. It's about great small examples, but if you want to change it, you need to take it to a city level or to a neighborhood level, because it also, one solution taps into the other. Another example I want to mention is, for example, an area in Amsterdam where we see it's in Buiksloterham. The session before it was also on climate resiliency. It's a floating neighborhood with a lot of circular solutions, but they recapture the black water of this small community. It's about 40 to 50 houses, and they have their own biorefinery. So the black water. It also is turned into bioenergy, which feeds back into the community. So it's how do you make new loops and make new connections, and taking a specific bigger area and approach it as a whole.
Can I pick up on that for a second?
Please, yeah.
So one example that I have that I think is going to ring home here in the Detroit area, I judged a sustainability competition earlier this year, and Ford Motor Company was one of the applicants that won. But they took a plastic wiring clip, I think it was for the Mach-E. Instead of sourcing it from the regular plastic polymer traditional fossil fuel based source, it is now coming from ocean plastic waste in the southern Pacific Ocean. And so if you can just imagine the whole new set of players that have to go into developing that supply chain, transportation, logistics, sourcing, educating your staff internally on the different properties and qualities. And it's kind of mind blowing what they had to go through, but they did it. And so I have tons of examples of that where people are totally redeveloping their supply chains to create those new loops that Ruben said, but it's happening, and that's really cool. I mean, plastics is kind of it's like a 4-letter word right now, and everyone is, I can't tell you how many polymer companies I've spoken with over the last year. Other local example, there's a company we're working with, alternative polymer company. So they're taking a waste feedstock from a paper mill up in Sheboygan, the sludge from the paper mill, and they're turning it into like flatware, tableware, playground equipment, stuff like that. So people are all coming up with all kinds of solutions, totally redesigning the supply chains and using waste products that you would never imagine.
So I would, it's maybe just to play off of that a little bit and just dig deeper into it and then maybe have Bo respond too. So what is motivating that? So for Ford Motor Company to disrupt, I'm sure what is a, pretty kind of well-oiled procurement machine to make that, for how they normally get the clip, to then go through this whole other process. Like, I don't know if you're able to share, kind of what might have motivated that or what might motivate the company to look for new materials to make,
They have, I think it all gets back to climate risk is business risk, and they are doing what they can to try to change their model. And so they have corporate climate commitments. They have an ESG program, as Ben mentioned. So you've got these companies that have commitments, and once you have a goal or a commitment and a strategy, you then the rubber meets the road then when you have to figure out, all right, how am I actually going to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of companies have put basically moonshot plans together. We need to be net zero by 2040, and they don't know how they're going to do it, and they're figuring it out. And it's commendable to have those guts. So that, I think that's where that's coming from. There's a lot of pressure from Wall Street right now. Investors, any publicly traded company basically has to have an ESG program in place, or they're getting some serious pressure, and they're having to show time-bound, public-facing commitments and show the progress.
Mm-hmm.
So the heat is on. BlackRock, one of the biggest investors funds in the world, has started to vote and swap out board seats. We see that actively happening in the corporate world. So that's one side of it. The other side is some small innovators. They see the business opportunity. They're saying, hey, I can take that sludge from a paper factory and make money off of it. I can go to the paper factory and say, hey, guess what? You don't need to send this to the landfill anymore and pay to send it to landfill. So I'll buy it off of you for $20 a ton. You're going to save $20 a ton from not sending it to landfill, and then I'm going to go turn it into a product and make money. So there's just a lot of opportunistic stuff going on out there. Coming from multiple angles.
Well, so then, Bo, you're one of those innovators, right? Seeing a resource that maybe other people would have put in a landfill. And so what kinds of supports do you wish you had either at the beginning or wish you have now to be able to keep, growing your business and leaning into that opportunity?
Oh man, when it comes to the support, obviously financially, we have a 24,000 square foot warehouse in Hamtramck. Which is like showroom, warehouse, and then our wood shop. I would love to have more space. I think any business owner would want more space. But I would love to work more closely. And I have relationships with construction companies and demo contractors. And I have my neighborhood guys who contact me when things are happening. But to have a more concrete, collaboration where it's like bedrock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're renovating 10 buildings downtown. Let Woodward Throwbacks walk through and see what is your game plan? What is the digital design intent? What materials are coming down before it gets destroyed? Because demolition happens quick. And as we know, the construction industry is extremely wasteful. So if I have the opportunity to get in there and even help with the design, I think it's really important for us. And I think we've been trying to vocalize this more as when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to reclaimed materials, you have to see reclaimed and salvaged as materials, point blank. This is something that I can take off and I can manipulate it and make it into another usable product. So for instance, I think sometimes people think about, when they think about sustainability and furniture making, they think of reclaimed wood, right? Wood that came from houses. Yes, we get, wood from houses, wood from structures, we create out of it. But what about wood from church pews? What about wood from other existing pieces? So I want to say 75%, maybe not that much, of our goods are made from salvaged church pews. You would never think that you can break it down. And we actually bought a mill. We started acquiring different woodworking materials so we can actually cut it down more efficiently, plane it, and then make it into stock
Mhm.
lumber. I think is reclaimed materials don't always have to look rustic. So I think it's okay if you plane it down so it looks new, but you still know it's not new because
Right.
it has like the density and like I said, it has a story for the most part. If that answered your question, I kind of elaborated.
It's interesting because we're trained as a society. Like we know when we drink a beverage from an aluminum can and we recycle it, that aluminum can goes right into another aluminum can. But when it comes to like salvaged products, not just wood, but a bunch of stuff, we're not necessarily thinking that of, it's a piece of wood. Let's continue using it into something else instead of sending it to landfill.
And it could look totally different from how it looked before. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in the past like 2 or 3 years, we've really been expanding and not getting away from just solely using wood products, but we're salvaging stone. I mean, we had an opportunity where we worked with Crispin. They're renovating the Book Tower downtown, and we got tons of beautiful white marble that came from the lobbies and from the laboratories. And we made a line of furniture, bar carts, end tables using that stone, as well as acrylic glass. Like I said, it's all about, it's just material that I can take and manipulate. So yeah, it's really exciting that we're doing. I'm excited.
So this is a fun. I'm going to throw it back up to Ruben on the screen. So it feels like maybe we're talking. This is a good segue into like the role of design. And so when you have a designer's skill set and mindset, thank you. And you look at these materials, you look at these opportunities. Like Ruben, what have you seen at the Hollow Circular Hotspot around how designers are approaching some of these challenges and opportunities? And then maybe we can, Bo's got an interest. Bo's, I think, the only designer on the panel, so maybe she can talk a little bit about it also.
Yeah, well, maybe to tap into the example Bo mentioned. If you take wood, for example, I think in the US you're like the front runners in wood construction, but if you take into account the design, if you want to design a building with bio-based materials, with wood, for example, then of course it makes a lot of sense already the design phase to use and design materials in such a way that it doesn't come out old and rustic if you tear it down after maybe 20 years. But if you make a building with all kind of standardized wooden beams that you don't, screw any bolts or saw it in a direction that afterwards you cannot use it anymore, it makes sense, of course, from a design perspective to design to reuse. So that's one element, and maybe one step earlier even is design in such a way that you actually, because if you take the R ladder, it's about refusing, reducing, reusing. The best way is, of course, to design in such a way that you don't get any materials or waste in the end. So that's even the smartest thing. So from a design perspective, of course, it makes sense to design in such a way that it's easier to reuse or reclaim the materials or remanufacture it, etc. And the one element that of course you would need, and that you'll see in the design phase, is of course the digitalization, creating digital twins that you actually know what you have inside your building. So if you approach your materials in such a way that you see it as a temporary warehouse where you put all kinds of beams and all kinds of materials that you can get out if you repurpose the building or parts of the building, it's much easier to reuse the materials and avoid that you have any construction waste afterwards. Yeah.
I don't know, Bo, if you want to add anything to that. Just, you're trained as a designer. And so when you approach...
Do you think that has impacted how you've approached, viewing these materials and reusing these materials?
Oh, of course. I mean, I feel like whenever I do any type of site visit, you just have to stay curious and keep your eyes open in a sense of like, all right, what could this be? And like I said, sustainability and designing and working with salvage materials, it is hard. It's not easy at all. So I wouldn't say it's the most affordable solution. But like I said, there's a big impact because one, you're saving it from the landfill, but two, you're creating, especially with materials that, like I said, were built to last. I mean, not every building was built with, all expenses paid, but for the most part, like a city of Detroit, it's just like, there's just such richness in I'm originally from the East Coast. I said this before, but whenever I walk downtown or if I go into like a lobby, I'm just absolutely amazed. And it's really sad when I see some of these buildings getting renovated and they're not taking the respect or the dedication to save some of these materials because you can't get this anymore.
Right.
You're not importing materials from Italy and putting in your space. But yeah, I think it's about just, like I said, staying curious and thinking outside the box. That's all you have to do. And then you can kind of think about the logistics of, okay, how can I actually do this? But like I said, it's the willpower of making it happen. Like you can do anything.
Well, and ecosystems, I think, earlier in the conversation, we were touched on like just the complexity of supply chains. And so I was thinking, Ben, maybe you could help us think a little bit about how you see maybe some of these ecosystems changing, like whether it's in cities and the energy service providers and others who are playing, are people, are these companies and decision makers, are those ecosystems fluctuating? Are they changing? Is it about proximity to each other?
Yeah. If there's a company down the street, I mean, if Bo's company is down the street and they offer, and we say, well, we want to renovate our buildings. We want to renovate our buildings with sustainably sourced and materials that are that come from recycled materials and save energy. Well, then I think that they're likely to procure those services, which also is kind of a question I had about a lot of these fascinating materials that you're using, is the energy saving potential. It's like, yes, it's good. It is merit in and of itself that these materials, from chalkboards and many other things, church pews, which is very interesting, are very sustainable in the material resources sense. I'm also interested in, built to last. If a city or a company wants to renovate a building, are some of these materials, do they show that they can insulate heat and cold temperatures better? Because and I ask because if they can, then that brings the conversation into an energy saving and thus emissions reducing space. So that was kind of a question I had to kind of make it more of a conversation. But they're really cost-effective models. You said that affordability can be a problem. Well, yes, but there's also certain contract models that can solve that. Let's just give an example. For instance, energy performance contract. So AECOM or companies like that will offer it, say, renovate our building. Okay, well, the contractors will come in and they'll maybe source sustainable building materials to renovate the building. And then they'll install, like in this building, a new HVAC system, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. And then they'll say, okay, well, you don't pay us up front, but you will continue to pay the same energy costs over time. But because we know that your energy costs will go down, right? That is the difference that you pay them. It is therefore budget neutral. So I would imagine that if contractors approached you and said, well, we want to kind of use some of your materials in our building renovations, that would be a part of that energy saving ecosystem. And because that energy performance contracting model is budget neutral, is very popular, it doesn't really necessarily break the bank for businesses and cities that are renovating their buildings.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say, when it comes to building an actual structure, you're not using salvaged drywall from like, you know what I mean? Like those are like materials that I would think that you would be able to source, like sustainable insulation, sustainable HVAC, X, Y, and Z. But just look around this particular room. Looks like there's some reclaimed wood on the ceiling. You have these fabulous coffee tables in front of us that are probably made from sustainable materials. Also these chairs. It's more about, it's not always like the decorative elements, but it's about what is the user seeing? What are they interacting with? That's what I mean about using sustainable materials in like our aspect. Like I wouldn't, so when it comes to like, oh, is this going to heat the room? I would hope that you would have the foundation to heat the room before I come in. I'm more of like the aesthetics. I mean, I know this is an example and don't quote me, but Starbucks, they've been trying to use a lot more sustainable materials in their build outs with like their tables, you know, their counter space, their installations. That's more of the millwork wheelhouse that we're in, not building a building from like the ground up.
But there are opportunities, and Ruben and Josh might want to, you know, I was in a conversation with Jen Guarino earlier this week. We're just talking about recycling textiles for insulation and for, you know, for auto interiors and that kind of thing. So yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up. There's a company in Detroit called Nextiles, and so they're taking automotive industry waste and turning it into insulation for buildings. And so that's a win-win. Like that gets you your insulating value for whatever application it's put in. But I mean, let's just set it straight here. Anytime a material is reused, it can go into a second life or a third life, et cetera. You're reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions compared to if you were to source new product, extract new raw materials from the earth and do whatever you're going to do with them. So usually that is a significantly reduced situation. The one point I want to make is, as far as the role of design, I think that design impacts every single area of the circular economy. So when we think about a business model or a product, and you're thinking about design, when you design the product, it impacts the upfront materials that go into it. You are impacting the use of that product. So you may bring a product to market that is innovating our lives. It's changing the way we do something. You know, think about scooters rolling around downtown. That was an innovation. It's changed our ability to have mobility. Design based on those upfront materials and how it's engineered and then manufactured, it also impacts the end of life. So what the heck do we do with that widget when we're done with it? Can we take it apart and send it into a second life and a third life? And then the one thing we haven't talked, we talked a little bit, I think we touched on the surface, talked a lot about widgets, but the circular economy also brings to life a lot of opportunities for services. So, you know, when Bo is doing her thing and taking materials out of structures and reusing them, there's a whole like army of people doing that instead of one truck taking it to the landfill. And that can go across every segment in the industry. Lots of opportunities for service. It could be the ESCO contractors that Ben was talking about. There's substantial service in the economy there. So just, design has the ability to infiltrate all aspects.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, and I was hoping maybe Ruben could help us. This is a great, you know, this whole day today is about, international collaboration and learning and understanding. And so, you know, maybe Ruben, you can help us think a little bit about the opportunities for Dutch and U.S. Collaboration in this space going forward.
Yeah, thanks. And I just wanted to, confirm indeed just what you're saying. I mean, the whole design aspect, and then I'll get back to your question. It's indeed about if you design in such a way for AVAC system, you know, through servitization, you stay the owner of it. You know, you have a very strong incentive to design it in a much more sustainable way to make sure that the products are going to last 30 years instead of maybe 10 years, you know, so that's a very important element on it. And indeed, you know, like we discussed, the supply chains, they're international, so it makes sense to work together internationally. For Holland, you know, we're a very small country, so it makes sense, of course, to work with international partners, but mainly because the supply chains are international. You know, if you talk about textiles, you know, maybe some of the yarns they're produced in Asia, you know, you have the brand that is in the US, maybe I buy it from a brand in the US and I wear my clothes in the Netherlands, you know, so it is an international supply chain. And that's why, you know, together we need to change it to create transparency in the supply chain, that you know where materials come from, how you produce them in, you know, an environmental friendly way, with, you know, taking into account, you know, also live view of people producing it. So the international collaboration, it's about, it's you know, imperative to make it work, circular economy. And of course, just from learning from each other, you know, that there's a lot of expertise all over the world, and you need to combine it. It's a big challenge that we face if we talk about climate change, etc. And we need each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I don't know if there's any closing comments anyone would like to make. I feel it's been a great fun conversation about just these different aspects. It's always this, hard for me to, conversation we've had has been so almost like at 30,000 feet, right? And, you know, a lot of times when we think about this work, it's really how's it impacting people on a day-to-day basis, and especially, like, you know, your business is here in the city of Detroit, you know, in a city that still has a lot of economic inequity. You know, climate change disparately impacts, you know, people with who are experiencing economic inequity. And so I don't know if anyone would like to close with any thoughts about, you know, what are the opportunities to maybe do things in a different way, do things in a way that start to address some of those larger issues that, you know, fundamentally, you know, might just create a better world for all of us, and a planet that isn't on fire.
I'll say two things. One, go out there and be bold.
Mm-hmm.
We need really disruptive change, and it's totally possible. And I think we're going to see a lot of fun change in the next decade. Second is it's happening. You can go to the store now, and you can see products with recycled content. There's this, I mean, pretty much a lot of the major retailers you go to now, there are solutions coming out. You buy shampoo in paper bottle now. You can get your deodorant that's not encased in plastic. So it's happening, but we just need to keep pushing for it to happen faster.
I second that.
Well, and in the last 11 seconds that we have remaining of our panel, I'll put a plug in for another conference that's coming up November 2nd through 4th at the College for Creative Studies. It's called Design for Adaptation, and I invite everyone to take a look at it. But it's about the role that designers will play in helping to adapt to climate change. So over 3 days, we'll have over 60 different papers and posters presented, number of working groups. It's an international conference with the Cumulus Association, which is over 300 design research institutions around the world, all coming to Detroit to explore this concept in further detail. So I hope you will check it out and maybe come be with us the whole time or for a day, or participate virtually as well. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Ruben, for joining us virtually, and see you in a little bit.